Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to AlumSpeaks On The Go. We have a very illustrious alumnus of Somaiya Institute of Management over here as a speaker for the session. We have Mr. Lloyd Mathias from the batch of 1988. He has done multiple hats in his corporate life. You name it, he's been a part of it, be it the industry or the sector or the roles that he has done. From being a CMO to president to leading the marketing activities for a company like HP, he's done it all. And now, if you look at him, he's very active on the media front. You can see his articles almost every alternate day. He's being quoted by one or the other media houses. So he's a thought leader in that manner. And it's probably one of the best times when we thought that we could have him as a guest for the session to talk about what is the reality behind marketing and branding. To introduce about the host for the session, that is Mr. Upendra Namburi, comes in from the batch of 1996. Again, and has an illustrious career, been a part of multiple companies, has been a part of SBI, been a part of Bharti AXA, has been the Chief Innovation and Marketing Officer for Bharti AXA in his last corporate role. And currently he has a startup which is called as Idea.co. So I welcome Lloyd sir and Upendra for Alum Speaks On The Go. Before we start, just a few heads up for the attendees and the participants. So the audio will be muted out for the participants so that there's no disturbance during the session. The video will be disabled so that there's no video lag or audio quality lag in terms of the speakers. If you have any queries, you can always drop it on the chat box. We'll be happy to pick it up, and Lloyd sir would be happy to answer it as well. So please feel free to share in your thoughts, your questions, your suggestions on the chat box, and we will be picking it up. Over to you, Upendra.
Hey, thanks so much, Arvind, and the entire alumni committee at Simsr. Warm welcome, good afternoon or early good evening to all of you. Firstly, I would like to thank everyone who's taken the time to join in on the session. It's fabulous to have all of you on board. So to kick this off, Lloyd, welcome, great to reconnect.
Thanks, Upendra. Wonderful to be here and wonderful to be amongst old Somaiya, SIMSR colleagues. So thank you guys. Thanks for making the time and really excited about this session.
So Lloyd, to kick this off, right? I must ask you this. COVID seems to be working differently for different people. You seem to be more handsome, healthier and fitter. So COVID is clearly working good for you. So what's the secret?
Well, I think, it's, in a sense that none of us, when we began this year in Jan or Feb, none of us expected that we'd go through what we are going through, right? We wouldn't have imagined that for 3 or 4 months, we'd be outside our offices, stuck at home, pretty much homebound. A lot of the things that we took for granted, going out to the cinemas, going to the malls, didn't happen. So I think, that shock hit us all equally. And, I plead guilty to that. It's just that, one of the things, what I've been doing in the last couple of years, working with a lot of early stage companies and startups has taught me is that the quicker you adapt to the new reality, I think the better off you are. So, at one level, we are pining to be able to get onto flights again and do the things that we do, go out and meet real people and, the puppy-juppy stuff. But I think the reality is that that's not going to happen. So I think just the reconciliation. I'm not sure what fitter, but what it's done is that without the physical meeting, the fact that most weekends you're going out meeting friends, having kind of big meals and such like, a lot of that has stopped. Right? So I look at that saying that, it's about 7 months of, not eating out twice a week, right? So that's what, 7 into 4, 28. So that's about, almost about 120 eating opportunities gone. That itself is a great thing. And the other part is really, you've got to kind of prioritize fitness. Initially, I live in Delhi and, initially a lot of the condos here were not even letting you go out for a walk, but now things are stabilized. So you can, plan your 60, 90-minute jogs, runs, whatever. So I guess it's helped us bring more balance because you've got more control, right? There's no commuting time. There's no staying late in offices. a lot of that has gone, and that's positive. And the big challenge and the one that all of us have to address is really staying mentally agile, right? This might continue 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, maybe a year. And we just learn to make the most of the situation. If you're healthy, your family is healthy, your near and dear ones are good, I think you got to count your blessings and walk the path and enjoy it.
So absolutely. So Lloyd, I think, and we were chatting about this the other day, I think most folks across industries and categories find themselves being on their toes. And I thought what we'll do today is possibly focus more on dimensions of branding and marketing and everything associated with it, so that there is a level of focus and we can possibly deep dive a little bit.
Sure.
So first off the bat is this question that I have to pose you. Every business and every category goes through cycles. You have internal risks, you have external risks. But in a nutshell, how is this crisis really different from most other crises which marketing leaders see?
Upendra, I think this is, in a sense, the first of its kind for most of us will see through, and hopefully the last in our careers and our working lives. In a sense that I've worked with a good few corporates, Fortune 500s, the PepsiCos and Motorola and HP, and I've been in depth in terms of going through what is called a business contingency planning. Right? They all have this exhaustive business contingency planning, and very often it's done over a kind of 3-day offsite where you all dive deep. And almost every one of us who've been to one will recognize that almost everything that we've seen in the last 6 months was not captured well enough in those manuals, right? So the manuals taught us about the usual disturbances. There could be a war, there could be an earthquake, and all that stuff. But almost nothing prepares you for, in a sense, what we've seen. And I think that, to my mind, is the first reality. The second aspect, and something that I'm trying to study but really understand right now, is that a lot of how businesses have coped really depends on two things. One is the internal resilience of the people, the leaders, and the large teams. I think that's, I would say, very, very critical. The ability to really withstand uncertainty and slowly find your feet and find your ground. I think that is the first part. And the second is kind of looking at it in two ways. One is looking at it at a 6-month, 1-year horizon, but also saying, how do you manage the next couple of weeks? Right. So two things I would think have helped, and of the startup businesses I work with and some of the VCs I advise, I realized that those that have created a fresh contingency plan, saying, hey guys, this is not going to be a very easy exercise. For the next 3 months, here's what we do. You guys continue to work from home. We'll relook at all your facilities for that, right? Whether you have a home Wi-Fi connection, is it good enough? Whether we have adequate security on your laptops, whether you need additional equipment, because I understand you have a family, you've got kids who go to school, they also need Wi-Fi and such time. So the ones who proactively have reached out to their employees, indeed to some of their close vendors and associates, right? The ecosystem is not just you and your employees. That's one. The second aspect, which I think is critical, is what I call the empathy factor, right? All of us in this call recognize that, life is fairly easy on conference calls because, hey, most of us come from places where you can dedicate a room in your house as your home office, and, you've got a, exclusive Wi-Fi connection. But that's not the reality of the world, right? As you go down organizational levels and structures, you recognize that a lot of employees will not have those same facilities, right? They'll be, living maybe in smaller residential areas. Maybe there are 5 or 6 members to the family. Maybe there are 3 of them who are working or school going, and therefore they all need the broadband access. So I think a recognition that it's not going to be simple. And if an employee is struggling with connectivity and such like, you have to accept that as reality. And companies that have done that, have kind of, you can say, navigated this process better. So I think it's a mix of resilience, it's a mix of empathy, and then doing what it takes to keep your business running. I think these are the critical aspects that, they've all come to play. So that, to my mind, is looking at the internal and external risks.
Sure. So over the last 6 odd months that we've been in lockdown and lockdown plus, you would have interacted with many teams across different organizations, be it in startup, mainline corporate, what have you. Can you share a couple of things which marketing and brand teams are doing well in a crisis like this? So what are the great teams doing well and differently, which maybe the other teams need to be looking up towards in the context of this crisis?
Great question, Upendra. I would say the first thing that I see good marketing teams do, both in mid-size and early stage startups, is quickly establish a cadence of how they're going to connect, right? So if it's kind of a daily morning 30-minute call saying that, hey, these are our objectives and challenges, at the same time quickly looking at the larger business perspective. Are our sales holding up? Is our distribution totally stopped right now because of the lockdown? So taking all the key business parameters, sharing it with the entire marketing team. The smarter ones also extend this to a lot of their partners, right? So if your agency partners, if your digital media agency, if your media buying agency is also part of it, that's better, because good information flow always helps, right? Very often marketing people get paranoid that, oh, am I sharing too much information? I think you can never share enough information, right? There's very little that your partners don't need to know, right? So feel absolutely free. Tell them about the state of your business. Tell them if the factories are shut, if your distribution is down, there's no business happening. I think one is a clear and transparent sharing is a hallmark of a great team. It kind of helps build a common bond. That's one. I think the second part is really looking at your business in two dimensions. One is, what are the immediate things you need to do? You need to put out messaging talking about the fact that your product's not available, but you're working towards making it available, or that you've changed distribution because of kind of shutdown norms. You moved a lot of your product availability online. So I think getting that communication across in a very cogent manner is critical. No point being extra smart and smart alecky, right? It's very tempting to write on a social media hashtag and say something smart. But I think the first rule of good marketing is say it honestly, communicate like a friend would to another friend. Let your consumer know that your product is now available through an online option. Here's how to get about it. So I think that clear communication. The second point, like I believe, is looking beyond that short-term horizon, saying there are still elements of your brand that you need to convey to the consumers. So everything that you do has to be out of that same brand premise, right? So if you're a fun, youthful brand, then find fun, youthful ways of saying what you're saying, right? Some of you have seen, let's say the IPL has been on for a while. Smart brands communicate in a tone that people tend to enjoy, right? So there's some great, I would say, Swiggy, advertising, because they see an opportunity of people in the lockdown or relatively the lockdown, sitting at home, watching IPL, great time to do food delivery or order food in, and therefore using the food metaphor, having a Harsha Bogle voiceover, good way. So I think therefore good marketing teams, communicate, talk about the larger business issues, and also proactively look at a slightly longer term horizon to make sure that their brand story is being maintained without being too extra smart in a manner of speaking.
So Lloyd, this is something which I've been grappling with. It's easier to communicate good stuff. How do you communicate the crappy stuff? My supply chain is broken down. I'm not able to give you 24/7 service. My tats are going bust because the call center is not functioning as usual. As a marketing professional, any tips for communicating the crappy stuff?
Upendra, the only rule of communicating, good and crappy stuff is 100% honesty, but being responsive. Let's say I've, personally experienced something, right? In the early stages of the lockdown in the first week of April, we had, a couple of an AC in the house that didn't work, right? Now getting to the LG service centers was next to impossible because their IVRs were kind of off gear, etc. So it was painful. It took about 3-4 days to actually establish contact after ranting on social media and Twitter and such like. So I think what you expect from good brands is honest communication. So even in the worst of times, keep a communication channel open. Be upfront. You can say that, look, presently our service engineers are not able to report to duty, and therefore we'll see a problem for the next 6-7 days. We generally want to apologize. So I think one is to at least say it upfront that, look, this is the extent of disruption. So at least people are mentally prepared that the next 5 days your AC is going to be. All right. The other part is then make good on your promise. Once you 6-7 days later, if that guy comes, and look at how one would make good to the consumer in terms of a small compensation element, right? So I don't want to get specific into the LG case because it wasn't a great example of customer service, but I know from a friend who had a similar issue with his home AquaGuard RO that wasn't serviced for that period, so he had to resort to buying kind of Bisleri or mineral water in bulk. That when the service guy eventually came, he did come back with an offer saying that I'm going to extend your warranty 3 months because of this inability to serve you for the next fortnight. Now that leaves a great response, right? So one is honesty in communication, saying your problem, stating it upfront, and 2 is looking at how you can make it up to the customer. That makes great sense.
Got it. And one of the other fallouts of this crisis and most other crises is the first thing which comes in the chopping block is the brand and the marketing budget. Okay. So when you face a chop in a normal circumstance, at least you're physically together, you're working on stuff. How do you lead a team in a situation where the entire world around you has changed? Your budget has come crashing down, but the output and the outcome again has changed. So essentially, because my outcome metrics which I'm getting measured by has changed. Sales have come crashing down. As a marketing leader, how do I grapple with this entire khichdi of stuff happening to me?
Upendra, I seem to have missed a little part of the question, but let me try and see if I got you right. You're saying that given the suddenness of the occurrence and the fact that the easy option for a lot of businesses is to cut back on marketing, how do you cope with getting your marketing metrics right? Is that right? My understanding of your question, right?
So I'll sharpen it, right? So I'm a marketing head of a consumer brand. Come COVID, come March, my budget is slashed. Step 1. Next part of the story. My KPIs earlier were linked with sales, but there are so many parts of sales that I cannot influence. Outdoor has gone for a toss. Media consumption is like all Audi. So suddenly what's happening is my budgets have been slashed. My metrics suddenly need to be redefined, but business has a very different priority and my resources have changed. So specifically, A, how do I quickly rejig and figure out what my KPIs and metrics should be? And B, in a reduced budget, how do I keep the wheels moving? Because I see most people going and slashing the agency budget as a quick knee-jerk reaction, but they in turn want the same quantum and even a different output from the agency. So it's all interconnected. And hence, what do I do in this chaos?
Okay, I got the question. So here are two points, Upendra. I think the first part is that I think it is short-sighted of a good marketer to look at it purely in terms of his turf. My budget has been cut. I think a good marketer will always approach it business first, right? If my business has had 4 months of inactivity and therefore my annual revenues are going to be down 30%, I'm just using a rough number, right, then I think as a good marketer, I need to mentally reconcile to the fact that my marketing budget ought to be slashed 30%, right? The whole world and everything was shut April, May, June, right? Businesses were down, retail stores were closed, etc. I don't expect to be blaring on television and running half-page ads. That's not going to happen. So I think one is to recognize the reality that the budget chop is not top management kind of victimizing marketing. It's a reality. You have to accept that. The second point is therefore is to quickly rationalize the metrics and therefore have a chat with your management committee or whoever the larger team and say that of what we are doing, here's what we're going to put in the back burner. Right? Traditionally, in summer, we'd run this peak summer campaign or we'd run this large digital campaign. That's not going to happen. And then look at the emerging reality. If you're going to say that, look, starting October, November, December, we see a little bit of a pickup. The festive season is here. IPL is happening. People have learned to live with the pandemic. COVID is a reality. Here, what are the measures we can take? So I think it's really being able to share your narrative of how you see it emerging with a larger team, and to lower or to alter expectations so that everyone recognizes the fact that you haven't done the peak summer campaign and therefore you won't get your top of mind scores jumping and so on and so forth. The other reality is also recognizing that pretty much all your competitors are going through the same phase, right? So this is not an unfair advantage, right? In a normal circumstance, when you get a 30% budget cut and your competition is going hell for leather, you're going to lose out. I think here that is not going to happen. So I think the first part is the acceptance. The second part is the quick communication of the new, look at the overall business objectives and say, here's what are the elements I would cut back. I would say, yes, outdoor has now become redundant to a large extent because people are not commuting to work. A lot of available avenues are gone. Print has got very badly impacted because for a period there were no newspapers. And then when they came back in reduced form. Television went through ups and downs. I would say largely down because initially there wasn't any fresh content. Some of course, rehashed good content, right? The Mahabharata, Ramayans were good. Now IPL is back. So I think as a marketer, you choose your media vehicles appropriately to communicate what you have to. You have to recognize that with the altered reality, you're going to, so I'm saying the more you take control of your budgeting to suit your current business objectives, the better off you are. The more you're going to clash with it saying, oh my God, this is, I wish I had my standard 6 crores to spend. Unfortunately, it's now down to 3 crores. I think is a non-acceptance of reality. I mean, eventually business is there to return a profit to shareholders, right? And you can't expect it's going to be normal. And the sooner, a good marketer aligns his marketing metrics to the business objectives, the better off he is. So I think that's how to play it, Upendra.
Got it. So Lloyd, at this juncture, I want to move into broadly looking, I won't say the future, but more a current context and the next couple of years. Couple of broad things come to my mind. A perennial challenge in most org structures and as a consequence for marketing leaders and marketing team members has been an attribution to a performance, a revenue performance or a profitability performance. I think gone are the days when marketing teams can just sit and be a cost center. There's got to be a sharper measurement and orientation towards revenue. So A is, any suggestions for marketing folks who are still sitting as a cost center? What can they do better to start having a more business-oriented KPI?
Valid, observation, Upendra. I would say that what one has seen in the last, you could say decade or so, is that a lot of the marketing metrics have moved from softer metrics to harder metrics. Broadly put, when you say softer metrics, you're talking of things like advertising recall, top of mind, better brand affinity and such like. And when you talk of harder metrics, you talk of more performance-oriented metrics, things like, growth in the funnel, number of leads, number of conversions, number of new account openings. So anything that's directly attributable to sales. So I think there's been a shift and mostly justified.
Sure.
Having said which, I think a good marketing leader needs to quickly bring his organization to the realization that not all of marketing can be directly attributable to business results, which means every marketing dollar you spend is not going to be sales related, right? The ultimate objective of all marketing has to be to drive business. But very often there is no immediacy factor. Some of the great brands, some of the great products, and some of the most profitable companies have built their reputations, their brands, and their profitability over a period of time. Just a couple of weeks back, I was looking at an analyst report that talked about India's top 50 listed profitable entities, and almost 80% of them were fairly big, consistent advertising spenders and had built a brand over a period of time, right? So one of them on that list was Asian Paints, right? 65% market share of the decorative paints market in India. right? Consistently big advertisers, they built on a reputation over time. There was Pidilite, right? The makers of the Fevicol range, right? They have more than a 70% share of the adhesive market. Consistent, big time spenders over the category. The big daddy of them all, in a sense, and for reasons beyond just advertising and marketing, was Maruti Suzuki, right? 51% of the passenger car market in India. Hugely profitable, great favorite of the markets, big on shareholder return. So a lot of the key brands, and there are some in a semi B2B. There's Lakshmi Machine Works, which has more than 50% of the textile manufacturing machinery, right? Very big players. There's ITC, though part of it is in tobacco, and tobacco is restrictive, but again, they sit pretty more than on a 50%. There is Hero, right? The erstwhile Hero Honda, but now the Hero motorcycles, right? 51% of India's two-wheeler market, or not two-wheeler, motorbike market. Again, big spenders over time. So I think the key realization there is that brands that build a reputation and a regard over time, deliver better profits, right? And good businesses recognize that fact, right? So I think as a marketer, you have to recognize that some part of marketing metrics will be brand building, will build long-term affinity, will give returns to your shareholders for years and decades to come. Some part will be immediate sales driving. But if you get too pushed into just metric related thing, how do I drive next quarter sales, next week sales? How do I drive leads? All you'll be doing is tactical advertising, right? If doing price offs, if doing promotions, if doing discount sales, if doing, dealer panel advertising becomes your motive, for the short term, you might survive a quarter or two, but long term, you'll be doing more harm, right? So a good marketer is able to draw that balance, saying, yes, in the current situation, I don't have money for the big brand campaigns, for the 30-second TV commercials. I'm going to be doing a little bit more tactical digital stuff. I'm going to be doing lead generation. I'm going to do a lot more, digital marketing in terms of, things that will actually get consumers to look at my product, try product, and then I can follow up and individually target him. I think you have to build the narrative saying that it can't be 100% switch, right? So now I'm going to get into an 80% performance marketing, 20% brand building. And as the season improves, get back. But moving effectively to 100% is always dangerous. And some of the most successful companies navigate this well. Now, I recognize a lot of the brands I mentioned were large scale companies and companies that have a history of being around for 20, 30 years or more. But even in the startup ecosystem, you can see brands that take that call. Right, and I'm, taking the luxury of mentioning a few. If you look at, let's say, the play of brands like Swiggy, Zomato, to an extent, even while they're not anywhere close to operating profit, now I recognize that they're still very heavily venture funded. They still set aside a lot of their campaigns to do brand building activities. Right, so while each of that campaign is related to an IPL game this evening and a special offer, while Hyderabad Sunrisers Hyderabad plays Mumbai Indians, a lot of it is also in the tonality that can build, a long-term, brand objective for, let's say, a Swiggy or Zomato. And that's critical. So I think brands need to keep that in mind. Brand custodians have to do that far more rigorously.
Okay. Lloyd, the next buzzword, which has possibly got a major testosterone shot in the last 6 months, is this word digital, right? So as I say, sometimes you have years which happen in seconds, and sometimes those seconds take years. I think we're seeing the former more than the latter. And they're having people doing a bunch of stuff, right? And great, because I think you need to do stuff. Sometimes over planning, being over meticulous can jeopardize you. If you are a marketing person, either on an agency side or a brand side, I've never differentiated the two. Can you run me through, if I'm in a consumer business, what is my ABC of building a digital brand? What are the 3 simple things I should be doing, and I should be doing well in the context of being a digital brand in India today? And leave aside the e-commerce part of it for a moment.
Only question, Upendra. Just at 2 o'clock this afternoon, KPMG put out their annual media and engagement report. Okay. They do it twice a year. And a very startling number that emerged, and I'll share this link with you and maybe you can get it across to all those on this call, was for the first time ever, advertising spend on digital in the first 6 months of this year, which is April to September, we are on the 30th of September, but I guess they've extrapolated the last 1 week, was more than television and print, right? So traditionally, advertising, let's say till 2 years back, the big two chunks of, suppose India spent 150,000 crores a year on advertising, right? The big two chunks, 45% was television, that's the big spend, and another 40% was print, right? So 80 to 85% traditionally for the last 10 years has been print and TV, right? For the first time in the last 6 months, digital, which was barely, say in 2012, around 8 to 10% of the category, has now become about 30%. And it became larger than print and now larger than television. But that's partially for the last 2 quarters, when you recognize that newspapers were pretty much off. April, May, June, many places were not there. And a lot of television advertising was down because there was no fresh programming, right? There was no live sports, and even the famous general entertainment channels, the Star, Sony's, Z's, didn't have fresh programming. They were using reruns.
Yes.
Right? So digital is now mainstream. It's no longer a 10%, right? So digital going forward is going to be 30, 40% of any advertiser. For the new internet age brands, digital is going to be very, very mainstream, right? So as much as we see the fact that out of the 7 sponsors of the IPL, right, on television, 4 of them are totally digital era brands, right? Dream 11, Cred, Paytm to an extent. So a lot of them are digital era brands. There was a time when IPL was all about Pepsi and Coke and Nokia and such like. Now digital has come. So digital is truly mainstream. I think that's rule number 1. As far as the 3 points goes, I think one is understanding the digital ecosystem and understanding the metrics, right? Buying media and digital is very different from traditional print and TV, right? As a traditional marketer in print, you went by the IRS, the India Leadership Survey. On television, you went by TRPs and therefore you allocated money. A lot of digital media buying is what is called programmatic. Define your customer segment, and then your agency, through a complex set of algorithms, will reach that consumer in the cheapest way possible, right?
Sure.
Which means if I say my brand is an upmarket brand for educated and upper income males aged between 35 and 49, historically you would say, okay, I'll buy Times of India, Economic Times, Wall Street Journal, and Financial Times, and I'll reach them. Now the agency says you don't have to spend those big 4 chunks in big newspapers. The same guy who reads Times of India, Economic Times, Wall Street Journal is also a big fan of English Premier League, whatever, where advertising is 1/3 the cost. So let's use that. So one is programmatic. So one is to understand the media buying process. It might mean spending time with the agency, but as a marketer, I think you need to understand digital from the media buying perspective. I think that's one big learning. The second, and very relevant, is the fact that social media is now again very mainstream, right? There was a time when social media was nice and it was good for millennials and young people. I think today across the board, there's a wide acceptance that social media has become mainstream, right? The news is dictated by what happens on Twitter. News is breaking on Twitter. Insta is on fire. A lot of brands are made and created. Influencers are now mainstream, right? There's a lot more credibility if 100 influencers who are not public figures are saying something nice about your brand than 2 stars who are being paid 5 crores a year. Because that a star who's tweeting about your brand is tweeting because he's getting money. Whereas an influencer says much more. I'll give an example. When I was doing the HP role, a big influence or a big, very critical business component for the HP printing business is that parents of kids who are between, say, 8 and 12, right? That's when kids do projects and they need a lot of printing. Now, how does one reach out to that kid, right? You can't advertise to kids in a manner of speaking, but you need to reach out to parents who believe that investing in your kids' education is a passport for a better future. So HP went around creating what is called 150 influencer moms. And these were ladies who either on Facebook or whatever had their own following, and they talk about better parenting tips, right? So there was this housewife in Coimbatore who had this, how she makes out a 30-day calendar of what to pack for her kids' tiffin. And such like. Now, reaching out to those influencer moms, presenting them with a printer and a few cartridges, and asking them to subtly integrate the HP story in their posts, high credibility, right? Suddenly they became, oh my God, this. If she's saying that, I do this and print it out of my HP printer, it makes sense. So I think the smarter use, and the only way as a marketer you will get social media is by being a user. I know for a lot of us, it is like, okay, TikTok's gone, but how can I ever do TikTok? And I think one of the lessons I've followed in the last 10 years is that very often you need to try out a medium firsthand yourself to understand the efficacy, right? I'm not Instagram generation, but hey, I do it, right? I'm a big user of Twitter, and but a lot of this was driven by big business need, right? I realized that you have to go there and play the game to understand the game, right? And there's no escaping for the fact as a marketer, you have to get your hands dirty, right? You have to get into Twitter, you have to get into Instagram, you have to get into Snapchat, if need be. LinkedIn, of course, I'm sure all of us are. So I think second is understanding the medium by diving in deeply. I think that's critical. Third is there are a lot of interesting tools that you need to use, right? So whether it's Sprinkler, which is a listening tool to understand what people are saying about your brand, about your competitors, whether it's performance marketing tool like HubSpot, I think all of these there are online courses. I think therefore learning these firsthand, right? It's no longer a matter of delegation, right? In my HP Asia role, I ran a team of 120 across some 16 countries. I never used HubSpot in my life, right? I saw Sprinkler reports. I didn't know how to get an output report from Sprinkler. What I did was, in the last year or so, I took courses to understand these areas. And I think the recognition that as a marketer, you've got to understand and put yourself in the shoes of your consumer and look at it the way he does is absolutely critical. So I'd vote all of you to say, rule number one, accept digital as mainstream. Two is learn the tricks of the trade by actually diving into digital yourself firsthand, get into your own social media accounts. Third, learn some of the new tools, the HubSpots, the Sprinklers, invaluable. And it's never too late to learn them.
Got it. So, Lloyd, I have this other dimension on digital, and I call this a two-dimensional one. You have an eyeballs, and then you have an association risk, right? So, as an example, you may do something in TikTok, just for argument's sake, but you need to be cognizant of the fact that there's an association risk. And the reason I trigger this is there's another question which came in terms of all the crap which is happening on television news today, right? So any suggestions to marketeers, brand owners, and agencies? How do you map and traverse that journey of balancing eyeballs and association risk? And where do you hold back and how do you do that?
Great question. And in a sense, a bit sensitive. Here's my point. I think the first hat that one wears as a business person is the commercial hat, right? It's your business to reach the maximum eyeballs at the lowest cost, right?
Absolutely.
So therefore, if it's TRPs or if it's CPM, cost per million, cost per contact, CPC or whatever, you typically go by that, right? So that to our mind is a no-brainer. However, what we've seen over the last 6 months, and as an aside, I wrote an opinion piece in the HT a month back on this one, is the fact that a lot of consumers, new age consumers, younger consumers, are what is, to use millennial jargon, very woke. And consumers are expecting brands to stand up and be counted and take a stand, right? So in the US, there was this big, issue about, the Black Lives Matter, right? After the police officer killed a colored person. And a lot of brands said that Facebook was not being very discerning in terms of letting those posts run on Facebook. And therefore, many mainstream brands, Starbucks, Coca-Cola, American Express, pulled back advertising, right? So that's a trend to take cognizance of. So I think brands have to learn to be responsive to what the consumer is saying, right? One fallout of the Black Lives Matter was, Hindustan Lever withdrawing Fair and Lovely, and of course, a little bit of cosmetic change, pardon the pun, they just changed it to Glow and Lovely. But having said which, I think it's a minefield. So as a commercial person, you will still use budgets to go by. You will try to get the maximum eyeballs. However, as a brand person, you also should look at your customer segmentation closely. If an overwhelmingly large percentage of your consumers are very conscious about a particular issue, a particular trend, then maybe you got to be conscious on the editorial environment. Let me give an example, and I won't take names. Let's say there's a particular news channel that's very shrill, right? They go overboard with issues. They handle issues with a lot of sensationalism. they are what a lot of your consumers say, they handle content in a toxic manner, right? And therefore it's kind of. Now, if your brand belongs to that little segment of people which believe that, the following two channels are slightly more toxic, slightly more negative, they tend to over sensationalize an issue, then that editorial environment is not good in which you want your brand to be seen, right? You will not go public. You will not say I pulled my advertising off the following two channels, but you might subtly, move away from the news genre, and you might focus on, general entertainment or IPL or, any other, whatever other channel gets to you. But it's a careful recognition of the fact that a lot of your consumers feel offended by that, right? But at the same time, and there is a current controversy brewing, and there are lots of issues. So the ET is carrying a story tomorrow on this. Is that it's easy to be swayed, right? So if you hear a lot of people around saying, hey, this channel is dangerous, pull out your advertising. If you go and make a statement that I'm pulling out my advertising out of this channel because the way they treat this entire SSR issue is, is not the way my brand would like to be seen, there's also a danger because there is a polarization, right? For every 10 people that don't like a channel because they're too shrill, there are another 20 that might like it, right? And if TRP numbers are to go by, that's the reality. Now, you don't want your brand to suddenly be in the face of a boycott because you pull back advertising channel A because you think their treatment of how they're handling a suspected suicide case is not appropriate, right? Because you're taking a stand, and that, as a brand custodian, is something that you have to be wary of, because you don't want to do something that will harm the prospects of a brand, right? So recognize that you're the individual, you have a heart, you have a conscience, you have a point of view, and there's a business, and you've got to balance the two. But I think it's ideas to be very, very careful, right? It's your business hat because that's what's your employer, that's what's paying you, that you have to wear first. But you have to stay cognizant. If you slowly recognize, and if there's a broad agreement in your board and your management committee that associating with a particular channel is not doing your brand and your business very good, then you might subtly pull out without making public statements. And that's how a mature marketer would handle it. But going to town saying, I'm pulling out advertising out of the following 3 news channels because their treatment is counter to my company's philosophy is dangerous, right? This can come right back to hit you, right? And that's not your business. Right? If you're an NGO, fine, you can do that. But if you're answerable to shareholders every quarter for your shareholder return, that might be dynamite. Upendra, I think you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Sorry. All right. So it's a very complex subject, and I think it's only going to get even more complex. So in sales, you have certain ethics saying there are kind of corporates and customers I'm not going to do business with. And banks also, you have that kind of a written or even an unwritten ethic. Do you think it's time for marketeers also to have something like eyeball ethics?
Interesting. I think, clearly in the financial world, there is, kind of publicly shared a credit rating kind of data. I know a lot of FMCG companies, not necessarily formally, they have a clear watch out for, let's say, distributors who are defaulters, right? So if you go down the field and you meet the ASMs of the large FMCG companies, they'll say that, in this particular market, don't touch this guy. Iski financial history bahut kharab hai, etc., etc. Right? So there are unofficial ways that a lot of it will happen. I would think, Upendra, there's a good chance that this kind of thing will evolve in the marketing space as well. But recognizing that these are social issues and there will never be 100% black or white, right? So while it's easy to understand that, it's easy to put someone as a financial defaulter because out of the last 10 businesses he's dealt with, in 9 times his check is bounced. So ki kaun si financial party kharab hai. But to say that a particular news outlet is always, the one who's a culprit may be dangerous, specifically in polarized times, right? We're living in polarized times. There are bound to be very different ways of looking at it. If you look at the gamut of news channels, there are ones which are far extreme right, and there are ones which are far extreme left. And there are some associated with a party and some associated with another party. So that's a reality, right? In the US, you have a Fox News, which is very pro-right, and you have let's say, CNN, which is kind of relatively more leftist. So I think while media outlets are taking stands, I think for brands it's dangerous. You cannot associate, right? Because you're still looking at that 100% of consumer base. However, if a small segment of your consumers, or if a big segment of your consumers is very much in one area, you might move your advertising or you may move your stancing there. But I do hope that marketers will evolve a kind of code of conduct on things that they will support and put their monies on, right? But again, leave it fairly open to judgment. That may not necessarily always work, right? So it's positive. My favorite example, in a sense, and it's not about advertising. It's about how I think Zomato, the founder Upendra handled that well. A couple of years back, there was a story about someone in UP who called for some food from Zomato. And then the customer tweeted saying that, sorry, I returned the food because it was bought to me by a person of a particular religion. And Deepinder got onto Twitter and said, look, there's Zomato and food is our religion, right? And it doesn't matter which religion our delivery boy, we will go ahead with it, right? So that was a nice statement. It was positive, but yet there was a large trend about boycott Zomato, right? They don't respect religious sensitivity or whatever else. So I'm saying there are controversies. But I think it's important for brands to walk the path, stay straight, and be very upfront about what they stand for without compromising their commercial viability.
All right, so I'm also getting inspired by some of the questions coming in. So let me put this as plain Jane as possible. You have $100 and using some logic, you said, I'm going to put it in news channels.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So my first question is, would your choice of $100 be influenced by the political orientation? So you're getting a news channel which is giving you a crazy shitload of eyeballs,
Mm-hmm.
but as a consumer that there is some crazy crap happening there. Would you let go of the eyeballs? What would your advice to a marketing head be?
I think when you drop your matrix advertising, I think eyeballs first, right? So you're still going to look closely at the channel that's delivering to you the maximum eyeballs.
Right.
The second part is the editorial environment. If you recognize that a lot of the eyeballs are coming because they are sensationalizing news, they are reporting news in a manner that's ugly and inappropriate, then recognize that a lot of your consumers find that repulsive, right? If the overwhelming majority of your consumers find that very repulsive and negative, then avoid that editorial environment, right? That might cost you a little bit of cost optimization, but it'll help your consumers see your brand in better light. A very important call that advertisers have to recognize is what is called editorial environment. When you put your ad in a mainstream publication like a Times of India or in a mainstream, channel, let's say a Star World in the context or Star Sport in the context IPL, it's being seen in a respectable environment, right? It's not the same as some, kind of local, not up to the great channel, right? You want to name names. So I think brands are very conscious of the editorial environment they're seeing, right? It's like taking a billboard in a Delhi airport or taking a billboard in a Palladium or one of those fancy malls, a Phoenix Mall in Mumbai or UB City in Bangalore is a great editorial environment to be seen in, right? Whereas being seen in a bus stand in some kind of down market area may not be good. So I think recognizing, so it's a balance of numbers and relevant editorial environment to your customer base, right? However, if your customer comes from a very rabid right wing or whatever section, I think as a marketer you have no choice. We'll go with where the eyeballs are.
Sounds good. Okay. Another question which has come in is on radio.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience, what's the efficacy of radio? And do you see it leading to, have you been able to draw any correlation between doing radio and selling stuff?
I think radio, and I saw that question from Ajay Chaudhary. So Ajay, I think radio is a tactical medium. I think it's perfectly built for retail. If you're a retailer who's got a particular outlet in a particular part of a city, radio is a good way. For larger brands, radio is a good call to action, right? So somebody's driving, he's on the metro listening to your radio. If you've got a specific offer, you can say, one click, call so-and-so number, somebody can give you a demo, somebody can do a product. So I think radio can be used tactically. It can be used, by retail stores to kind of drive business and such like. It can be used in a short-term burst. For 1 week, you have very high, kind of rotations. You have the RJs calling out your brand. So I think there is a use in a very tactical, smart way. It's not a great long-term brand building tool, right? So smart brands and smart politicians use radio very well. I mean, you've seen in the time of Delhi elections, the Aam Aadmi Party used radio extensively. So I think radio is good to create topical news. It has high announcer value, but you recognize that the niche of viewers or listeners is very small, right? It's for a long time it was the people driving to work and drive time, right? So which is that morning and evening period. Now, of course, that has shrunk because of the lockdown. So it is a tactical medium, and but you can't build your brand solely on radio. Very few brands have really built big, big awarenesses on radio.
Okay, I like the other question which has actually come in and which gets even more acute with COVID possibly, is the value gap between, or the gap between a perceived value of a brand and the cost of a product. So let's say I buy maida at $100 and I buy a branded maida at 120 rupees.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a greater shift towards the $100 product because budgets are getting tight? And as a consequence of which, what can brands do to add value for that gap of $20?
I think in the next 1 year, I believe there are kind of three customer responses to this whole pandemic. One is what is called deferred sales, right? So I was in the market to buy, a 60-inch LED TV, right? Uncertainty, job insecurity, I'll push that back. I'll say, boss, 1.5 saal baad dekhte hain, ab to nahi hai, right? So some sales get deferred. The second reaction is sales are lost forever, right? A lot of us made summer vacation plans, ki kahin Europe jayenge, whatever. That's gone forever, right? This summer is gone and that's gone. The third thing, which is what you're referring to, is what is called consumer downtrading, right? A lot of guys recognize that times are bad. I've got to kind of redraw my family budgets, and people will therefore move down the scale, right? So I was typically buying X atta, I'm going to come X minus 2 or whatever. So I think there is going to be rational downtrading. I think it's a reality. And therefore, I think highlighting the customer value benefit or the cost value benefit of your product is a good time. It's a good time to talk about the value benefits, because a lot more consumers are going to be getting value conscious, right? In a sense, the area of free spending, at least for some time, is going to be tempered, right? So I think that's one change. And the other, if I can just allude to it, because this question throws up that, it's for a lot of, I work with a lot of the VCs in the startup ecosystem. A lot of them are very comfortable in the subscription economy, right? I'm going to take a leased car, I'm going to lease out furniture, I live in a rented home, I'm going to, take my dream holiday on EMI. I think it's making a lot of people rethink that, right? So there was a generation, 30 years back that said, boss, you need to be debt free, right? Once you hit 40, you want to be debt free. And, some of us belong in a sense to that. And now then there was a generation that said, look, life is good and we'll keep earning till we are 65, 70 and, we can pay stuff. I think the second one is seeing a few challenges, right? I sit on the board of a company that does furniture rentals, and they're having a lot of buyers who are questioning the fact, how long can I keep paying that 15,000 rupees a month on this car, or how long can I keep paying that? So I think for a short term, a little bit of the subscription economy is going to take a little bit of a beating, right? A lot of people are also going to be more conscious about building that little security pot of gold, right? As a country, we don't have a social security system, right? We still have to depend on our personal finances, our families and such like. So I think there is going to be a switch. I know for a fact, a couple of VCs have seen that a lot of savings-oriented fintech companies are seeing an upward spike, right? People are beginning to look at their portfolio saying, boss, can I ensure a 5-10 year security horizon, right? What if a fresh pandemic breaks 3 years from now, right? The last pandemic happened in 1918, so none of us saw that. Now that we've seen one, this generation is going to fear that, boss, 10 saal baad ho sakta. So I think there is going to be a lot more, and that's going to definitely switch. So therefore, talking value, talking of cost effectiveness would be a good way.
So coming back to the maida example, I've got a commodity non-branded maida at 100 and I have a branded maida at 120. If I am the guy who's managing the branded maida at 120, I have two choices. One is I make a pricing recommendation saying reduce the price. That's a clear, obvious one. Are there any other creative ways of managing that? for that set of consumers who is going to make a choice for buying $100 maida?
I think a good marketing proposition is always playing to a consumer need, right? So in one case, you're saying the need is the consumer wants it cheaper because he's a little fearful about his job and security. A very, very big trend that is emerging out of the pandemic is consumers need to improve their health, right? A lot of people who took health for granted are now suddenly beginning to realize the value of immunity, right? Because suddenly we've seen the pandemic up close, right? 6 months back, COVID was something in Wuhan in China and such on and so forth. Now we know someone in our building, in our neighborhood, my office colleague, my relative, etc. So people have become a lot more conscious about health and about immunity. After online, video conferencing and edtech, the biggest sector going through a spike is medtech, which is remote diagnostics and such like, right? So in the context of Maida, to answer your question specifically, I think re-emphasizing the value of the brand that, let's say good branded Maida has certain health attributes that help you stay strong, fitter, etc., and builds your family immunity, not just now, for period to come. So without drawing a direct correlation to the pandemic, but emphasizing issues related to nutrition, immunity build and such like are positive. And all of us have. I never drank, haldi in my doodh ever, but that's become a norm, right? So in our own way, we're all kind of, putting a little ginger in our chai, putting haldi in our doodh and so on and so forth. So I think playing on people's concerns about immunity and about personal safety and about health and hygiene, I think is positive. So as a brand marketer, you bring that aspect, saying that branded Maida is, let's say better quality, more nutrition, has more, free radicals or whatever it is it has.
So healthy maida should be a good brand idea, right?
Absolutely, right? Cheap may not be the answer in this case. Healthy would be a better answer.
All right, so Lloyd, as we head towards the close of the session, a couple of things I want to pick up with you. One is, of course, another question from the audience, and I'm glad she's raised it, is no publicity bad publicity?
Say that again, please.
So is having no publicity at all, so you have a choice, right? You can either ride a trend and maybe some of the occurrence might be bad, so you make tomorrow considered bad publicity. But is bad publicity better than being invisible?
No, I think it's good to stay the course. It's tempting to ride a trend and, be in the news, but sometimes that could backfire. So I think sometimes it helps for a brand to be silent and not worry about, the fact that you're off the consumer eye. Having said which, I think one of the advantages of digital economy and digital marketing, and the fact that today there are about at least 500 million active internet users in the country, is that you can keep an ongoing dialogue. Right? There was a time that brands, to keep a dialogue with the consumer, had to spend big bucks on TV and print. Now, I think a very clever way is using your social media to stay relevant, right? Engaging with consumers, starting a trend, and even using humor smartly, right? So responding to consumers, responding to a competitor, talking about trends. So I think it's nice to stay in the news. So it's look at a brand as, as someone trying to be your friend, a person who's always talking to you, reaching out to you, forwarding to you a WhatsApp joke, thinking about you on your birthday is someone you value because he's taking the effort to reach out to you. So I think as a brand person, digital marketing is a great way to keep a constant conversation, but don't say something on mass media just to stay in the news. That's kind of dangerous.
Right, sounds good. Okay, the toughie. If I'm a marketing or a brand guy today, all right, I've come out of COVID. My top line has taken a beating. The CEO is saying, I've written off this year, all right. I need to somehow make sure I survive till March, all right. I have no clue what the hell to do, buddy. You're a marketing bloke. I don't know what to do with you. There's very little budget I can give you. And the reason I'm asking you this is I've had many conversations with folks who seem to be in similar things. So the leaders are genuine, but they really don't have the resources to give their marketing team. And whenever they have a chat with the marketing team, they're saying, I need money. And that's the last thing which this guy has. What should the marketing team do?
The best thing the marketing team could do is to ask the leadership what is the single biggest concern with the business right now? Is it viability for the next 3 to 6 months? Is it the fact that they genuinely have a sales issue? So if I were a market leader, I would therefore say that, look, at this point in time, if there is a clear viability, I'm okay to go without spending $1 on marketing for the next 3 months. If it means deploying our 8 marketing people to do a supply chain role or whatever, I think it's worthwhile. I think you'd recognize that this is a crisis. This is unusual. This is something no business is planned for. And anybody who could demonstrate his value and effectiveness to the business will win in the long term, right? So I think no point standing on the high horse that I'm a marketeer, my job is to spend money, etc. I think sometimes it is just saying that if the business needs to do this, I will hunker down and do it. So I think it absolutely is. I think anyone who has any pretensions of being a great marketer should recognize that marketing is only as good as the business you exist in. Right? You can do great marketing, but if your company shuts down, your history. So I think, align quickly with the business objective. If it means shutting down, so to speak, your current marketing role and, rolling up your sleeves and joining the sales force or, doing a supply chain for the next 3 months, I think this will be remembered. This will recognize the fact that this guy, this girl gets the imperative of the business, knows how to adjust to change, knows what are the real imperatives of running a business. I think that's helpful. In my mind, it's a no-brainer. Do what you think is good for the business. Marketing will always survive, and good marketing will does what's good for the business.
So, Lloyd, if anything in this entire 1-hour conversation, that's my biggest takeaway. I think we are employees of a brand, or we are working for an organization. We are marketeers second. So we need to get off the high horse of a silo or a department and say, if it means I load the truck to make sure the truck gets out, let me do it.
Absolutely. If I just add one point, if I may, Upendra, I think therefore, one of the first things I always, say to people who've joined the marketing teams, and I've done, sales and business roles as well, is that the more amount of time you spend kind of out with the consumer, the better it is. I recognize that in a time like pandemic, you can't make sales calls, you can't go and meet distributors. You can listen into the call center, right? So it's always important to get in some of the best ideas, some of the best suggestions, and the best thoughts come from the field, right? No matter how smart we are, you won't get those big ideas sitting in the office, right? So spending time with your distributor, with the consumer, with your sales colleague, meeting a disgruntled customer, hearing the call center, taking in customer complaints is an invaluable resource. Spend as much time as possible. And those of you early in your career, go out to do the field roles, right? It's great to be a consultant. It's great to be a strategist. Someday you'll make the big bucks. But the learnings that you have in this, and just your development as an individual, it helps us tremendously just being out there and, keeping your ear close to the ground.
Okay. And as a final one, as a corollary to that, if I am a member of an agency, could be a brand, digital marketing or whatever, and of course, my life is dependent on what the brand does. And I make money if the brand spends. So as an agency, as a member of an agency, what can I do differently to stimulate work and hence earn my bread?
I think a good agency would try and understand what is the business issue, right? So what is the problem? Get from your marketer, what is the biggest challenge? Is it, like I said, the viability of the business? Is it the fact that, currently it's going through a low? So I think the moment you try and get after the business issue and try and work at solutions, the marketer will begin to see you as a natural ally, right? And I think some of the best work that have come about is when agencies start seeing their clients' issues as theirs. So the full identification. As long as you're working, how do I maximize my revenues? How do I sell him one more campaign? How do I slip in one more? It doesn't work. I think sooner or later, most people recognize the difference between someone who's truly committed and someone who's pretending to be committed. So I think it's really going out, understanding your client's problem, internalizing that problem, and then try to work out solutions. And very often your solutions may not be communication linked. Some of the best agency relationships are ones where the agency comes with ideas that are beyond the advertising domain. Right, some of the work that Ogilvy's done around on Fevicol or Cadbury's, various agencies, they go beyond just the communication part, right? So the first thought about, kind of building the whole mithai concept around Diwali for Cadbury's, saying that it was always a very Western thing. It was about boy, girl, Western. And, Ogilvy came with a suggestion saying that how do you make Cadbury's a kind of mithai for Diwali? Just like the way we exchanged, mithai from the Halwai. So I think, a good agency will start looking at solutions for the business, not just solutions for communication.
Wonderful. So Lloyd, amazing as ever. I think we connected on the podcast precisely a year back. So great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. I've learned a lot and look forward to catching up with you soon again. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Upendra. Wonderful. And thanks, SIMSR team, for having me. Always a pleasure. Great memories, great place. Thank you, Arvind. And wonderful to be here, guys. And feel free to reach out if I can help you guys in any way. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. All the best. Cheers.
Thank you.